I'm Russ Cassady, Regional Editor of Appalachian Newspapers, and we'd like to welcome you to our first election look ahead, where we're going to be taking kind of some time to get in there and kind of take a look at the races that are going to be coming up this year, in both the primary and general elections. We want you to be a participant in this as well. So absolutely, if you've got questions, comments, or anything, message us, comment. Be sure to like and subscribe to our pages. That way you can keep up to date with what's going on in the elections. I'm joined today by Tyler Syck, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of UPIKE. Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having.
Absolutely. So, obviously, Tyler, one of the biggest races that's going to be on the ballots throughout our entire coverage area of Pike, Floyd, Johnson, and Perry counties is the race for U.S. Senate. Who's going to replace Mitch McConnell? This is a big deal. I mean, this is 40 years of political dynasty, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
What happens? What should people be looking for in this race?
Well, I think it'd be very interesting to see because I think when you've had an incumbent this long and in a seat, there becomes a real question of what does it look like after them, because we've been so used to the same thing for forever, and I think there's a real question on the Republican side, as there is kind of in the whole country. What does it really mean to be kind of like a modern Republican representing the party? All three candidates affiliate with President Trump and his movement in different, but they all do it in kind of different ways in a different language. They all three have pretty different backgrounds. One's a long-term congressman, one's a former attorney general, previous candidate for governor, and one is a businessman. This is his first foray into electoral politics as a candidate. I think that's a real live question. And on the Democrat side, you kind of have essentially it's increasingly seems to be a list of people who ran in the past for some seat and lost, and now are seeing if they can try to capitalize again against somebody who isn't their own political dynasty, like Mitch McConnell.
So looking at this, from the way that the electorate has changed in eastern Kentucky, throughout Kentucky, can a Democrat potentially win this race?
It would be very hard, I think. Against somebody like Barr, I think the answer is absolutely not. Against Cameron, who's lost in the past, it'd be hard to say, well, if he's lost to a Democrat once before for statewide office, he probably could again. But again, Kentucky's very Republican, and it's harder to convince people to split ticket on a Senate race than it is a governor's race, just historically speaking, all over the country, not just in Kentucky. And then with Nate Morris, his particular weaknesses, he's more on the sort of the far right end of the candidates. And there he would risk losing a lot of voters who are maybe a little more moderate, Chamber of Commerce type Republicans who could maybe vote for a kind of pro-business friendly Democrat. That said, the Democrats have to be running the right person. And I don't think it seems that any of the people running on the Democratic side actually stand a really good chance at stealing that seat from the Republicans. You'd need somebody like Rocky Adkins, I think, who's with that level of universal bipartisan popularity, and they're not running anybody like that.
Yeah, especially in eastern Kentucky. So McConnell's been known, obviously, as a national political figure. But as far as what he's done legislatively for Kentucky, that's honestly a question. But what's at stake? Should the next person be concentrating on what am I going to do for Kentucky, or should they be trying to get back into that role of the national?
Yeah, I think that's a real quick, and that's always when you fill the shoes of a long-serving incumbent. I think there's always a big question: do you kind of strike out on your own, or do you do what they did? I think it's going to be hard to fill Mitch McConnell's shoes. There's 100 senators, not all of them get to be a national figure. Most of them don't. And Kentucky's interesting in that both of our senators have for some time kind of been national figures. Rand Paul in a lot of ways speaks for a whole contingent of libertarian Republicans and conservatives, not just for Kentucky. It would be very strange if Kentucky's next senator was able to fulfill a similar niche in addition to being able to represent Kentucky. My inclination is they're just going to end up being just a regular senator, one among 100. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually.
Right.
That can be a very good thing for Kentucky.
Right. And of course, Senator Rand Paul will now be Kentucky's senior senator, so that's a change. Well, speaking of change, the 95th District State House seat, which represents Pike, or part of Pike County and all of Floyd County, Ashley Tackett Lafferty had the distinction of being the only Democrat in the legislature after Robin Webb defected to the Republican Party. Um, there's a lot going on there. We have two Republican candidates who are vying, and of course, Johnny Ray Turner has the Democratic nomination as being unopposed. What's that race going to look like? And again, can a Democrat win?
I mean that's going to be an interesting race. I mean, if the primary you have is, I think the Republican primary is going to be very interesting. There's three candidates, rather, with very different backgrounds, very different public personas, very different pitches that they're kind of making to voters. It'll be interesting to see what kind of hits. That seat has in general struggled to nominate Republicans clearly who can garner enough support to win. I mean, there have been contentious primaries in the past, but nobody was ever able to come particularly close to unseating the Democratic incumbent. Now, if I was advising the Democratic Party, how do you keep the seat without Ashley? I would say, you need a Democrat with lots of name recognition and somebody who has a reputation for not being too liberal, that kind of bad, what the voters might consider a left or woke Democrat. Well, that's Johnny Ray Turner. I mean, the Democrats have found the best possible candidate they could have for that seat, and at that point, I think that could be an interesting race. I really believe that one could be anyone's game.
Right. There's few Democrats in Floyd County that have the political, I guess, reputation that Johnny Ray Turner does, except for maybe Greg Stumbo.
Right, yeah, and unless you're going to get him to come back and run for a state representative seat, this is as good as it gets. And if he can't win, I mean, it makes you really wonder if Democrats can win any legislative seat in Eastern Kentucky, I think.
Right. Well, obviously, Tyler, we do have some interesting things going on down ticket. We've got a lot of, especially here in Pike County, we have two long-serving major public officials stepping aside: Judge Executive Ray Jones, Pikeville Mayor Jimmy Carter. What Pike County's preparing to shift back to a magistrate form of government. All these big changes are happening. What do you think is going to be the response to that? Are people going to turn out to vote? I mean, obviously candidates are coming out for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting time because, I mean, I think two things are kind of going on here, which is one, that the same people just can't serve in office forever. They get tired. They want to leave. They want to have a life outside of public life, which is fair. But also, I mean, the economy is getting worse. Jobs are leaving the region. It's getting harder and harder to afford a home. And this is not Manhattan. People feel like they should be able to afford a home in Pike County, and the areas around here. And so I think there's a lot of unrest and upset about kind of the current state of things. And that's exactly when you see incumbents step aside and incumbents lose. And so I think there probably will be high voter turnout. I think if anything, people might be pretty enthused about the idea of voting for people who they maybe haven't voted for in the past. And especially in some of the city commission and magistrate seats, you're seeing candidates a little bit younger than we historically have. And I think that probably enthuses a new population in the area. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think one of the big twists as it shifts is it's mostly Republican. And so Democrats, sort of actual partisan Democrats, not people who are registered Democrat and typically vote Republican, might have lower voter turnout. I mean, I think that seems quite possible. But I think in general, people are going to be kind of excited to see where these races go, and you don't have a name of somebody who's been serving in office for forever to help boost them into the re-election.
Right. Well, obviously, President Donald Trump, who's extremely popular with the electorate here, one of his big selling points has been that he's an outsider. Yeah. That he's not a political figure up until he was elected president, that he didn't have these reputations. In Perry County, for example, we have a total of 6 people who filed for judge executive and sheriff. We have 4 people who filed for hazard mayor. We have 3 Republicans, and of course the independent incumbent who filed for judge executive. And a lot of these people have no political resume. Is President Trump and his popularity a factor in these people seeing an opportunity, or is it just a feature of or a bug of the current political environment?
I'm going to incline to think it's a bug of the current political environment. These people are kind of bubbling up out of the same soup, so to speak, that Donald Trump comes out of, which is people are unhappy with the way things are. And when that happens, that's when you get outsiders. And there are huge advantages to having outsiders. They see politics and policy and the way the county's been run very differently. They also sometimes lack that experience some of the other candidates with a much more establishment background may have.
Right. So it's a double-edged
sword. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, and it depending on how it turns out, really depends on who it is and how they handle it.
Right.
As is so often the case with public office stuff.
Right. But obviously, I mean, it is going to be an election where these, I guess, brand new candidates have an opportunity that they may not have had 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, Eastern Kentucky has, I don't know if you would call it a problem or just a feature of politics here. People get elected and they stay in that seat until they die, or nearly are dead. And that can be a good thing, because experience is good, but it does feel like the tide is slowly starting to shift away from that in Kentucky in general, and in Eastern Kentucky in particular. And it'll be interesting to see if it's just a matter of people aging out and turnover happening, or if, in fact, this is going to be the new normal, where we have much greater rotation in our public offices than we used to.
Right. Well, when you, I guess, bring that out into the wider lens of national politics again, we have the 5th District, a congressional seat up for grabs. Hal Rogers has been in that seat forever. He served, I don't even know off the top of my head how many years.
I always joke to my students how Rogers was able to support Abraham Lincoln's Republican agenda during the Civil War. And the tragedy is they don't laugh because they don't feel like it's a joke.
That's a fair point. But obviously he's drawn several challengers, and one of those, Ned Pillersdorf out of Prestonsburg, is making a lot of noise. Is he vulnerable because of that kind of feeling that these people who have served forever need to go on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is Hal Rogers is vulnerable, but I don't know as any of the people currently challenging him. It would take a kind of secret mixture of ingredients to really unseat him, and I'm not sure any of the current ones have it. I mean, you would need somebody very, very young, but ought to sort of contrast with his age and experience, but you would also need somebody at the same time who has lots of funding and is able to spend that funding to get their name out there. That's a rare kind of person who's both like young and charismatic and also like has on tap a huge amount of political resources. Nobody like that's running. I don't see him being unseated, but wild things happen sometimes.
Right. Right. Well, obviously it's going to be an interesting year for politics, and what are you looking towards? Like what gets your political nerd excitement up for this year?
I think the most interesting thing to see this year is how the Republican Party is going to shake out in Kentucky. The base in the Republican Party, like who's a registered Republican, who votes consistently for Republicans, has changed over time in Kentucky history. I remember my grandfather used to say Republicans are farmers and businessmen. They're not working class people. And my grandfather was a farmer, so this wasn't a bad thing for him. But that has changed. Kentucky is now much more, the Republican Party is a much more working class party, much more blue collar party. That's going to change the political dynamic. At the same time, there's a collection of voters who maybe aren't finding themselves as at home in a much more populist, much more economically moderate Republican Party as used to. Where those people go, it's a live question. They may stay Republicans, they may become Democrats, they may become independents. In general, what we're seeing is what we in political science call a political realignment, which means what it means to be a member of each party is kind of changing a little bit. And in Kentucky, where the Republicans are now the dominant party, what that looks like is a kind of fascinating question. Because when you have one party so dominant, sometimes what you have happen is you have kind of factions within the party develop, so that you essentially have two parties within a party. Other times, what you see is the party kind of gets so high on its power that they alienate enough voters to switch sides, and then in the end, you end up right back to a kind of vibrant two-party system. The first option seems more likely in Kentucky, but it's still kind of early days on this, and the second option seems really possible. And so I think these Senate races, magistrate races, all these Republican primaries are going to be very interesting to watch.
Right. I think for me, one of the big things I'm going to be watching, Senator Philip Wheeler mentioned, in an event I was at recently, about how, because of the way the party is in the state legislature, that it's not so much a Republican versus Democrat dynamic
Yeah.
as it is an urban versus rural dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see how that pans out, if that feeling kind of filters down to the electorate as we go forward, or whether, it's just one of those things that we notice from afar out here in eastern Kentucky, closer to the capital of West Virginia than the capital of
Yeah.
Kentucky.
Well, and I think what would be really interesting is, will that dynamic kind of spread? Because, like, even in Pikeville, there are, I guess you could say, more urban voters who live like in downtown Pikeville and things like this, and share some characteristics with more urban voters in places like Louisville. Do they eventually kind of start to shift into kind of the urban faction, even out here in the county? I don't know, but it would be kind of interesting to see, I think. And that used to be the Republican Party in Kentucky. They were really the more urban party. That was their big base. Where voters like that out here, and you could cobble enough of them together that if you win the cities, you could win an election. That would probably be the smartest strategy for Democrats. Doesn't seem like it's one they're taking, but
Right, exactly. Well, there's a lot in play, obviously, as we're going forward, we're looking at this. At the time we're recording this, I'm watching as political changes are happening at the national level. It's going to be interesting to see how the national plays at the local level going forward. Regardless, Appalachian newspapers, we're committed to being here for you guys going forward. We're going to try our best to cover these races, even down to the smallest races, with the most in-depth and just thorough coverage of the candidates, of the races, of the issues that matter to you. Again, we want you to participate with us. We want you to be a part of the conversation, so please participate. But also, be watching our newspapers, our social media channels, our website, like, subscribe, all that. But again, Tyler, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and to talk about this. This isn't the last conversation we're going to have with Tyler. You're going to get familiar with his face one way or another, either through us or just through the work he's performing on the Hill. But again, we thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to us, and let us know what you want to hear and the questions you want to see asked. Tyler, thank you very much.